So our first speaker is Leonardo Vidal. He's emerging technologies and international expansion at Zendrive, international general management and advisory expert with an extensive background in consulting, sales, and product innovation in EMEA and Latin America regions. Projects in digital transformation, AI in health and finance, decentralized blockchain DLTs, digital identity, API management, enterprise mobility, and cloud communications. He has experience in the B2C and B2B sales and business development activities at C-level with major tier 1 and 2 telco groups across region. He also has the vast exposure to international business practices, having lived in 4 countries. So Leonardo, on that note, off to you.
Thank you very much, Wes, and thank you very much for the opportunity to explain a little bit about what we've been doing as a company. And so I have a presentation here that will basically guide this discussion. But of course, happy to answer any questions. If you want to make it as interactive as possible, it's better. So we make it available for you. So I'll talk a little bit about Zendrive. So as Wes mentioned, I've been with Zendrive for about 2 years now, basically leading the international expansion of the company. So the company is essentially in the business of making roads safer through data and analytics. So it's a company based in San Francisco, back in 2013, was founded with the objective of leveraging smartphone data and essentially make roads safer using those sensors, right, available in the smartphone. So the company, as I mentioned, founded in 2013 by former executives from Google and Facebook. So for the past 8 years, we've been actually very successful in deploying this technology and helping not only insurers, but also other industries like automotive with our technology. So essentially, the company for the past 8 years has been in a very interesting position because we managed to leverage and essentially capture and analyze more than 185 billion kilometers of billion miles of data, which is essentially more than 300 billion kilometers of driving data just using the smartphones. We've touched somehow more than 100 million users using our technology around the globe in a variety of use cases, and also, as I mentioned, not only in the insurance space, but also in the automotive space. And we've managed to capture more than 100,000 live accidents around the world, again, across these hundreds of millions of users that have been using our technology somehow. And as you can see here, some of the insurers and also automotive and fleets that have been using our technology around the world, and all of them had something in common. They basically want to leverage driving data and somehow give the awareness of the users on how they're driving, and of course protecting them in case of accidents. So the kind of drivers today that we are seeing on why, for example, insurers are of course demanding these kinds of technology. So we saw, of course, with the pandemic, we saw some acceleration, as I'm sure that you are familiar with most of these trends. But essentially, there is a digital shift. For the first time, insurers' website matters more than the agent channel. So they're definitely going digital. There is a price sensitivity with the pandemic. So of course, customers are looking to essentially reduce their costs of the insurance. And from talking about the auto insurance, because that's where we basically play with the driving data, there is of course a more openness to adopt the UBI. Of course, Italy has been a very mature market in terms of UBI for many years, starting with the hardware. But what we are essentially talking here is how can smartphones can actually help insurers today, not only to offer a better pricing through usage-based insurance or eventually behavior-based insurance, but also how can these data can actually that is being captured every day around with millions of people, how can this data can actually help in terms of making roads safer and preventing accidents for the drivers. So as I mentioned, we are essentially the software-based space, and the reason why we see a good demand for software-based solutions today is if you look back at the first wave of telematics, the hardware-based telematics, somehow there was some sort of friction, right? So you needed a hardware to be installed in this in the car. Of course, you had some privacy concerns about the data being generated in the car, and essentially the user not having the ability to understand what is that data being captured for, and sometimes the kind you needed some sort of a user intervention, either for installing the hardware or for installing a new OBD device in the car. So there was a friction in terms of requiring the user to essentially interact with the solution. So talking about the data that was being generated by these hardware devices, sometimes there were, because there was, different types of device providers, sometimes the data was not exactly the same. So we did have some data inconsistencies. And also, there was a very limited use case in terms of course, security and theft was a big value proposition for the hardware. But if we're talking about usage-based insurance, it was all about giving additional discounts, which, of course, some of the incumbents were, thinking twice in terms of cannibalizing their own business if the market was, just not prepared for it. So we saw that there was a limited use case when you're talking about just the data coming from the device in regards to theft and security, which is fine. But also was too focused on discounts, and there was a big issue. So the third thing that we saw is, of course, the low adoption. So the user experience was not that engaging, was not that good, right? Apart from the discounts itself that some of the insurers were offering. So it was an attractive value for them, and of course the testimonials or the excitement about using such solutions was not that clear. So there was a big problem when you look at the first wave of telematics that was just using the hardware solution. So when we're talking about deploying such telematic solution,
Leonardo,
yes,
a quick question for you. Maybe
yes,
into your early days, right? So
right,
we have been discussing a lot of times how modern insurance, be it on the cybersecurity, be it on the health, be in here, is shifting more from the risk sort of management to risk prevention. So is the solution that you provide at ZenDrive, are they more on identifying the right sort of customers and right people, or is it more on the prevention as well? Like, for example, when person is speeding, there is like a I don't know, a shiny light saying if you continue to speed, then your insurance will go up. So how do you kind of look into that?
yeah, both. It's actually a very good question. So, when you talk about the solution itself that basically runs on the phone and is monitoring the way you drive, yes, you have the whole thing about the driving coaching, which can be exposed to the user, and that of course helps so you can be aware on how you drive, and eventually you can improve over time with the right coaching, with the right programs and the right incentives, and of course mid to long term you start to see the improvements, right, in terms of lower claims frequency and all of that, because you're basically interacting with the user and essentially letting them know that they could do better. And if there is enough incentive, like a discount or maybe an incentive or maybe another partnership that you can bring to the user based on the way they drive, yes, longer term, mid to long term, you can see the prevention part taking place. But what is interesting is because with software, we are actually collecting data at scales that you can compare with hardware. For example, at ZenDrive, by having more than 100 million users that somehow use the technology and having more than 300 billion kilometers of data, the kind of insights you can get from that data can actually work with you, can actually work in your favor. When you think, for example, that the insurers can actually look at these huge amount of data that are being generated by the smartphones, and really start to have for example, risk models where you take into consideration, vast amounts of collisions, for example. So we take claims or we take collisions into consideration in our internal models. So we not only look at, how many kilometers you drove, but also, what was the frequency of collisions inside this population, and therefore you can have some sort of signal from that data about the risk of your portfolio. But you're talking about, in our case, hundreds of millions of users, and you can have a very effective risk model take into consideration not only kilometers, but also the driving behavior itself. So, and at that point, you can, for example, if you understand that the preferred risk that you have coming from, a specific signal coming from this data, that's one of the projects that we do. We help our insurance customers to expose their risk model coming from the smartphone sensors. We expose those models, for example, to be integrated inside a fintech application that can, offer them like a 30 days, trial before you buy program. And the fintech application is basically generating thousands of leads every day, with the insurer's risk model embedded in the fintech application, to them every month. At the end of the month, we can be generating dozens of thousands of leads. That's a real project that we have. For example, with a customer in the US called Credit Karma. So we embedded Progressive's risk model inside our technology, and we integrated our technology with this fintech application, and they offer to their users, and they have 100 million users base in the US, Canada, and the UK. They offer the user the ability to opt in for a 30 days trial before you buy program. And at the end of the 30 days, this risk model is essentially analyzing the way they drive and picking exactly the preferred risk that they want. So they are acquiring, customers at the preferred risk level, and not just a generic, Instagram advertisement where they're, basically getting leads at scale, but not their preferred leads. So this is one type of also benefits that they can have to this. So they can prepare the kind of risk that they are going to be acquiring, and now, of course, by leveraging the data and having all those models actively learning every day from the data, you can achieve such an automation in such a preferred risk level acquisition.
Yeah, thank you, Leonard. And we have two questions. So the first one is
Please.
from Salvatore. That based on the constraints that you showed, what was the game changer that increased the adoption of the solution?
So it's actually, as we see, it's not a single aspect. But first of all, the fact that it's the software that can be easily installed in your app and in your phone, I think that definitely reduces the friction of forcing the user to have a hardware installed in the car. So that's point number one. Point number two is that very different from the hardware that used to give, still gives feedbacks about how many kilometers you drove, what is the gas level of your car, or if you're braking, a little bit here and there, if you're speeding. When you put this inside an app, where you are basically collecting data every day, it's really used to use because it's just an app. You don't need any hardware installed. And you can have insights like, am I using too much of my phone? So hardwares today, for example, they cannot know if you're using phone. Yes, you may have a camera, but then the solution starts to become quite complicated. You introduce another friction, right? So somebody needs to buy a camera from the insurer and start being monitored, which the user will not like very much. So one of the aspects that we have is just downloading the app and having it there, you don't need to touch the app. Everything just works automatically. It detects trip. It knows how you drive. It detects if you are interacting with the phone while you're driving. It detects collisions, which with an impressive accuracy of up to 95% of collisions. It and combined with the right user experience of giving something for the user, right? So get some sort of incentive for the user to use the app and to go back to this app every day because he can get rewards, because he can get an incentive on something else. That all bundle makes the software-based solution very attractive. Because again, you don't need a piece to be installed in your car, and you're basically friction-free in terms of downloading the app. So another important point as well is that some insurers are starting to realize that it's not really just about the insured assets, but it's really about, can I follow that user wherever he goes? So with these types of technology, you can not only understand how you're driving, right? And when you are in your car, but let's assume you are an Uber driver, or if you are a passenger, in a friend's car and you got involved in an accident. So immediately with the software-based value proposition, we can identify if that user is yes, he's in a car drive, he's a passenger, but he got involved in an accident. Why not inform the family or eventually pay for the service that can give him some sort of roadside assistance or emergency support? So what I just described is a use case that we have with General Motors in the US. They were very famous by the button, right? The OnStar button when you get involved in an accident. But they start to realize that they need to start following the user and not just the car. And with such a value proposition based on software, they're now following the user wherever they are, even if they are, as I mentioned, in an Uber drive, or even if they are in a motorcycle. We can identify all of that. So that helps a lot. So you can start to focus on the person, and of course you can come up with different products because you know that the person is not driving, but he's in a motorcycle or he's biking, or he's an Uber driver, and you can offer additional products.
Awesome. And then we have another question from Francesca. One
Yes.
question for my clear understanding: the user had to download the app, or does it sit behind other app, such as Facebook or other? Thanks.
Yeah. So so this technology is actually it can be embedded in any app. So it can be the insurer's app. It can be our own app that can be white labeled for the insurer. But the bottom line is, yes, it can be embedded in a different app. So the example I gave with this fintech company in the US, it's integrated with their own app, but our SDK, the technology, is basically behind the scenes, analyzing the driving behavior, protecting the user in case of accidents. So is it available today on Facebook and Google, etc.? So the short answer is no. So we don't, at least from our technology, it's not available through these consumer apps. And I think part of the reason is of course the whole it needs to have a synergy of it with what you are proposing with the app. So in other words, giving some sort of emotional hook that you are being protected in case of accidents needs to be associated with the app that you have. So by just enabling these on Facebook, yes, it may make sense, but a lot of people might have privacy concerns and don't understand why they are tracking me, why am I driving, and that might not make sense. But in the insurers environments, or in this case for the fintech, because the fintech was offering their users the possibility of getting a discount from a insurance partner, that made a lot of sense. So there was a synergy in terms of the user experience and the value proposition.
Perfect, thank you.
All right. So just moving forward here with some additional points. So as I mentioned, as we start to collect data at scale, of course, I'm sure you're familiar that insurance. If you can leverage all that data that is available for you, this is this is definitely revolutionizing the way you could be doing business. So as I mentioned before, we as a company have been working with our insurance companies under these buckets of possible projects. So preferred risk acquisition, I just gave the example about this project in the US with the fintech called Credit Karma. So from an insurance perspective, they are acquiring only their preferred risk. So only based on their definitions on, if this user has, a good driving scoring, is he driving, most of night driving? Is he, is he making more than 300 miles or 460 kilometers per week? So they can have a lot of profiling and segmentation, and they can go straight to the preferred risk that they want to acquire. So preferred risk acquisition is definitely something that data is enabling. So of course, the whole thing about usage-based pricing. So it can be priced on mileage, but it can also be based on behavior data on how you effectively drive. We also support, with the data we collect, claims automation. So because we identify crashes, for example, within 20 seconds of the crash, I understood that you are involved in an accident. And within 2 minutes, I can generate a detailed crash package of what happened during that trip that ended up in an accident. So as you may imagine, if you have that information, in some sort of an automated and mobile FNOL, you can make your claims automations more effective because you can ingest a lot of data that is actually coming from the scene of the accident. So just a point here, of course, data privacy is very important. Some of the insurers are actually giving the accident protection as for example, for free. They offer this to the entire base and basically have a legitimate reason to collect the data and to be monitoring and protecting the user. But of course, when it comes to sharing the accident data itself, we have ways, for example, to control if the user may say, yes, I want to share that data, because if I share that data, my claims will be settled faster. And therefore, I have no issues in sharing. But of course, he can control if he wants to share the accident data itself. So you can still capture if he was in an accident, but sharing the claims data or the accident data is something that in some parts of the world, yes, the user needs to needs or wants to have the control before sharing, and we can also support that. So another point that driving data is helping and is revolutionizing data saying is, of course, the engagement. So everybody knows one thing is to download the app, the other thing is to effectively use the app. So because we generate information on how you drive, and again, it's not just about braking, not just about speeding. It is about, am I using too much of my phone? That is an important concern today. I can provide some sort of engagement in this app, so users can go back to this app every other day to check how they drive, or they get notifications saying, have a lovely week. Insurance X, Y, and Z is here to protect you in case you have accidents. And that is an engagement point. So some of our insurance customers are using the crash protection as a way to have an engagement every other day with the user. So engagement is very powerful and has to do also with one of my comments before, that this is a big difference. So the whole user experience and the whole purpose on why the user is coming back to your app now makes a lot of sense. So to finalize on these comments on the frequent engagement, what we are seeing now is that some insurers are starting to deploy family safety value propositions in the app, which in short is the ability for me to register my family and see how they drive, or see if they got involved in an accident proactively. And this is essentially making people to go back to the app and have a real reason to basically have all the family using the app. So this of course brings engagement to the app, and is something that some insurers are deploying today. And to finalize, we understand that the actuarial models that exist today, some of them do not take behavior data into consideration, and more important, they don't take smartphone data into consideration. So what we are also enabling with our customers is the ability to develop specific risk models that takes into consideration the driving data that are coming from the smartphones, and bundle this and merge this with their each insurer's risk model, and then create something that is very specific to that insurer, and of course leveraging the driving behavior data that are coming from the smartphones. So so we are seeing this is a trend that these insurers are actually moving to the next level of their actuarial models and starting to leverage behavior data coming from the smartphones. And yes, we've been doing this with many insurers around the world already.
So Leonardo, question: are you able to match the driver smartphone in a specific car? So
yeah, so that's a good point. So in this slide, I actually have the answer for that. So as I mentioned before, we only leverage smartphone sensors to capture the driving insights, right? So we read all these sensors that we can see here. We apply our machine learning algorithms that are based in these 300 billion kilometers of data that we captured. And essentially, we generate these driving insights, right? So we, as you can see, some of these insights are, normal insights that you could also get from the hardware, like the aggressive acceleration, the speeding, and the hard braking. But we have some very interesting insights about, the accidents itself. If you are a driver or a passenger in a particular drive that was captured by the smartphone.
How can you distinguish that? How can you distinguish that I'm the passenger versus buyer, or sorry, driver?
Right. So a couple of ways. Well, first of all, that's one of our secret sauces, and it was only possible if you have that amount of billions of driving data. And so we take a few algorithms after you complete a drive, after you finish your drive. We run a series of algorithms on the phone that essentially understands, if you're a passenger or a driver. I'll give you one example. Imagine, and again, it's just one variable that we took into consideration, but just to give you a feeling of how we do it. So, of course, if in some parts of the world, let's say in Italy, so you basically finish the drive, and you basically, if you're a driver, you're basically getting a phone and leaving to the left, right? That's one that's one variable. So if you're leaving to the left, and essentially also because of the dynamics of the phone, I know that during the drive, that phone was actually in front of the car or was in the back of the car. So we take all of that into consideration, and that's one of the variables that helps us to identify if you're a driver or you're a passenger. Of course, that if you're a passenger, you get your phone and you leave to the right, again, in Italy, right? Not in the UK. But these are, for example, this is just one variable that we use in the algorithms to understand. So our algorithms today, they are about between 85 to 92% accurate when it comes to identifying the passenger and the driver. And that's an important topic, right? If you're talking about the software-based solution, you need to make sure the accuracy of these predictions. Let's better say, and that's one of our strengths. And again, it was only possible because we have 300 billion kilometers of data, and we analyzed these and we developed these specific models across time, leveraging the data. But another point, responding your initial question, if we tie to the car, So we have a couple of ways to tie to the car. One is, depending on the region, having a Bluetooth in the car is pretty common. For example, in the US, 90% of the cars since 2015 are produced with Bluetooth stereos. So the app can actually tie to the Bluetooth stereo and understands that you are in a particular car. So that's one way how we associate the app with the car. The other way is, of course, we have like a small tag, Bluetooth tag that you can just leave in the car, and that tag sends signals to the app, and then we understand. Okay, fair enough. I'm in a particular car, and I had a drive. Therefore, this drive happened in a particular car. So these are ways that insurers are tying the car to the person, to the driver.
So maybe like another question, right? I remember that one of the favorite psychology and sort of self-reflection studies is that 75% of the drivers identify themselves as the better half, right, of the drivers.
Right.
So let's say that I listen to you and I go to the Zen Drive, and I think that because I'm such a good driver that I will get a smaller risk profile and I can get a better deal. And then I start driving, and then your system tells me that I'm completely horrible. I'm always on the brink of the accidents. So
Right.
is there a way for me to sort of roll back, or once this data has been collected, I kind of hurt myself?
No, essentially, as you drive, and we are always capturing that information for you and evolve over time. So you could start driving really bad, but then because of the driving feedback that we give you, listen, you are braking too much, or you are making really bad sharp turns, or you're accelerating too much. Sometimes the driver just don't have the awareness, right? That they are basically speeding 90% of the drives. And this is why the driving coaching is important. So it can give the user the possibility to improve. And eventually this will translate into less claims, of course, for the insurer. So to your point, yeah, so the user can understand exactly why they're driving bad. And with the feedback, they can try to improve. But again, it's not overnight, right? So you don't change a habit overnight. It takes time for you to understand and to digest and see a reason for improving. And of course, when it comes to discounts or when it comes to incentives, these are definitely interesting ways to motivate the user to drive better. So yes.
So maybe another question here. So in terms of like excessive speeding and aggressive acceleration, is it relative to the other drivers, or is it sort of some absolute towards the some kind of suggested, I would say, driving patterns? Because I might be bad, but I'm actually might be better than the majority of the people, and therefore my risk
Right.
should be less than.
Right. So our models, it takes it because we work worldwide, and we have driving styles from many regions. And of course, driving in Italy is driving different in Spain, which is different from the US, which is different from Brazil. So in our models, we apply the driving patterns to the variables that are present in our scoring system, which essentially normalizes based on the driving behavior. So of a particular region. So with that, you can basically make sure that if you're a very bad driver in one country, you're actually a good driver in another country because they drive differently, and it's all about the behavior of driving. So in our models, we take that into consideration, so we don't either penalize or benefit somebody from driving bad in a particular part of the road.
Perfect. Thanks so much.
Yeah. Okay. So just moving here. So as I mentioned, we read sensors. We apply our machine learning algorithms directly on the phone. So everything happens on the phone. And then we can extract all this information at the end of the trip. So the trip starts automatically. I don't need to push any button. You can just drive. You don't need to open the app, nothing. It's just there capturing everything. And at the end of the trip, we can gather all those insights and make it available for you as a user. Or sometimes the insurers, they don't want to show all the information to the users. They want to show just part of the information to the users. And it's up to the insurer to really decide the kind of user experience they would like to expose to their customers. So, and then that information is available, to the apps, through dashboards, or even for integration with the insurance customers. So this is just a representation of what would be, our insurance customer journey. Usually they start with UBI programs, UBI or BBI programs. So they launch an app, they start capturing data about how people drive, and their drivers drive. Then they go to providing collision notifications capabilities to their users, and so it's not only to, of course, identify the collisions right away, but also to give a good user experience for the user. So whenever he needs, or whenever he's in a crash, the app can actually walk the user through the crash moment. And of course, you have the crash data as well that can help the next session, which is ingesting claims data and making FNOL faster. Then we talk about, because at this point that they went through all these three initial steps, because they already generated billions of kilometers of driving data, we usually work with our insurers to develop their own custom insurance scoring or insurance model. And essentially, these insurance models are used for better pricing and really understand the risk based on their unique risk profiles. So after we go through this stage, when they have this model available, we are in a position to, IQL stands for Insurance Qualified Leads, but we are in a position to take their model and embed in our partners, in our high volume apps partners that somehow leverages driving data or driving awareness value proposition in their apps. And so we can generate leads for these insurance customers. So the example again is our project with Credit Karma and Progressive. And that is a good explanation. So we can use fintechs, we can use even automotive companies that also have an app. So we're basically embedding their custom scoring inside our SDK, and this is going to be integrated in our partners app. And finally, we are also we usually engage in, for example, in predictive models to understand route safety, because they have a lot of driving data, because they understand sometimes driving data coming from different parts of the country. So they basically start to dig deeper in this driving data and come up, for example, with route safety or collisions projects, right? So you basically understand the safety of a particular route based on the driving data that you captured for your population. So again, it's just a representation of how data coming from smartphones could be helping insurers today. And again, it's just one representation of what's possible with data. So talking about what makes us attractive for our customers. First of all, the scoring that we use in our technology is based on not just on number of miles that a person, or number of kilometers that a person drove, but it's based on actual collision data. So our scoring is highly predictive of risk, and we take that into consideration. And again, because we have more than 100,000 live collisions that we captured and more than 300 billion driving kilometers of driving data captured, we were able to develop this model. By the way, this model we developed together with Milliman, which is a famous actuarial consulting firm. So we also have a very diverse data. So our data distribution really represents the geographical distribution. In this slide, I talk about the US, but we also have driving data from many parts of the world. So it's not about a few drivers in a particular part of the city, We're talking about drivers that are coming from, different parts of the city, different driving profiles. And what's very important as well, and that's a pretty technical comment, but that's a very important to mention, that it's not just about, if you're talking about software-based solution, you have to take into consideration the device models. Of course, an iPhone has a very different sensor quality than, an Android phone or maybe a Huawei low-end phone. And therefore, this solution needs to take that into consideration, because otherwise you might be penalizing somebody that has a really bad phone and cannot, a bad sensor in the phone and cannot really capture, the driving data with details, as opposed to somebody that owns an iPhone that has really good data. It can eventually capture, bad driving behaviors. So having that device experience when it comes to software-based solutions is vital, and we take device models into consideration in our models as well. So in that case, we don't penalize or benefit somebody from having a good or a bad phone. So that's a very important topic when it comes to to software-based solutions. And the last point is, of course, seasonality of the data. So we really take behavior data seasonality into account. So we analyze how people drive throughout the year, for example, and not just in a specific time where they're being analyzed for just a few months. So that is also important. So the model can actually be can be a good model that you can apply on top of that data.
So a quick question from sort of like the data modeling perspective. So what kind of validation do you do, right? Because there's one task where we're trying to build the models, but then we need to actually go and verify that our data model are pricing the risk correctly. So what kind of the verification process do you have built in, especially if it's used by the by the third party, and then collisions and accidents, everything like that is handled outside of your ecosystem?
Yeah. So one very important point is that the driving data that we have is actually it belongs to us and our customers. So we never sell that data, right? So the driving data and the collisions data and all the data that I mentioned before, it belongs to our customers and to us, basically to improve our algorithms, and that's it. So we don't sell data. However, from to your point, in terms of making sure that our accuracies and our models are good and etc. That's why, for example, why we worked with Milliman to essentially develop our insurance scoring model. So we worked with them, of course, based on the driving data that we captured, and then we had their endorsement, right? That the model that we developed together was predictive of risk, as it is today. So that's one point. So that is for the scoring mechanism. Let's put it this way. For the collision data, we have partners. As I mentioned, we work with companies like GM, or we have, for example, like BMW is one of our investors. So we work with such companies. In of course, validating our crash models, our crash data and everything to make sure, that our data is, or our models actually represent, what is intended to be, right, in terms of accuracy and etc. So so that is another very important aspect. So we do in the special case of accidents, we do a lot of validations with these companies. So we also, of course, have external data that is available in terms, again, talking about accidents, where we can match with the data that we capture together with this external data, in this case about accidents. And then we can basically validate that our frequencies of crashes and everything somehow matches what this external data are telling us, right, in terms of accidents in a specific zone. And then we match with the number of accidents we managed to capture in that specific zone. And then we also validate the model. So yes, the model validation is of course very important, and again, based on our data model and our partners, we make sure that they are validated.
So on that front, right? So
Mhm.
there are sort of two measures to the accident, right? So the first one is the collision itself, the actual incident happens, but then there's also a monetary value of that incident, right? You can have a small scratch or you can have completely total car. So what about that monetary value? How do you capture this, and do you sort of factor that into the model? So like for example, again, maybe some behavior actually causes a more financial damage than other
Right.
behavior. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's a definitely a good point. So yeah, there are other companies that are specialized in this, right? So they basically capture, the accident. After the accident happened, they basically take the picture of the car and essentially tells how much that car is going to cost to be repaired. So we usually partner with in this ecosystem, right? So we capture the crash data and we generate the crash package, and with that crash package together with the actual crash costs, we usually work and develop those models based on the insurance needs. So that is how we look, let's say, at severity, right? So it is definitely taking into account this external data, or the ecosystem data that comes from the partner. So that's how we would develop the model for the severity. So we need their data. We know, as we don't do the repair costs, we don't do it ourselves in our technology, but we
Yeah.
can definitely leverage that data together with the driving behavior and then come up with the model that is predictive of costs.
Perfect. Thanks so much.
Yeah. Yeah. Is that it?
Yep.
Okay, very good. So I just have it's quite a technical slide, maybe not good enough for the audience, but I just want to mention something here that as an insurer trying to launch a good user experience for their users, there are some consumer concerns that, because we've worked with other industries, not just insurance, but we work with consumer applications, really high volume consumer applications where driving behavior and accident protections are part of the value proposition. We learned a lot over the past 8 years that all of these technology, all of these great things that machine learning can do, and everything that is magic, right, coming out of these technology is only valid if the user is really using it. So, in other words, if this app is consuming a lot of battery, that is the first thing that the user is going to do. Okay, thank you. I'm not going to use it. It's just consuming my whole battery. It's just killing my phone, and I don't want to use it. So having a very optimized product was part of our experience in developing value propositions for consumers, and that is something that we see as a big technical point, but it's directly related to customer experience. So don't develop something that will just upset the user because they will just disable or uninstall the application. So second point is a lot of the solutions out there are essentially capturing the driving data and transferring huge amount of sensor data to the cloud to be processed, and then sending back to the app. And in some markets that we heard from some other solutions, users were taking like 2-3 megabytes of data at the end of the trip. So as you may imagine, sometimes people may not be very happy that they're using, an insurance app that is essentially eating 2 megabytes after an hour of driving. And again, in some markets, that's a very big deal. So having a product that was extremely optimized, basically consuming less battery and analyzing everything on the phone but still consuming less battery and transferring really low amount of data was very important. So it looks like a technical thing, but again, it's directly related to the user experience. You don't want that user to be upset, again, because you're consuming a lot of data. And the final point, we're talking about smartphones. And as I pointed out before, knowing the models, knowing that each of these models, device models can do in terms of sensors, in terms of data, quality of data being generated is extremely important. And because we work with so many customers around the world, and we support more than 6,000 device types, we were able to basically give 99% compatibility with the smartphones in the world. So that's very important as well, because you don't want to launch a program where your technology will only work well, with iPhones. This will kill the value proposition of collecting driving data at scale. So, plus, I guess for the first part of the presentation that I have, that's what I wanted to cover. The second part of the presentation is maybe going through some of those areas where we help insurers, but I want to make sure that the audience wants to see some specific that I spoke, and I can go talk about that, or I can just keep going here with the slides and interact as the questions come. So is it okay that I
think that's great, Leonardo. Thank you so much.
Okay. All right. Okay. So I just want to put some examples of usage-based programs that we launched. And how we've been helping some customers. So these are just some examples that we launched for the past 9 months. And again, they're somehow our customers, or at least the customers from last year, right? They're all somehow being pushed by the fact that UBIs or usage-based insurance programs are somehow being demanded very heavily by their users. So these insurers had different ways of looking at the UBI, BBI variants, but these are just some examples. So Grupo Sura is in Latin America. They launched a blend of usage-based insurance, so pay as you drive, but also they wanted to include some driving coaching feedback to get the user used to the fact that even though I'm just charging you by the kilometers that you are making, I also want to give you some sort of driving feedback, because at the end of the day, what I really want is to reduce my risk. So they introduced both the UBI and the BBI blended program in the same app. So AIG is a mileage based top-up program. There was an important project that we have with them. Shara in Israel also is a behavior-based program. They also are very interested in collecting driving data and developing their preferred risk model in the future. And Undo is another example that we have. Undo is part of a big group in the Nordics as part of Trig. So it's a digital insurer, and they basically launched a trial before you buy program, which essentially the user drives for a period between 2 to 4 weeks. And at that point, they have enough data about the user and how they drive. And also the user is, enough for 30 days driving to, to improve the chances of converting. So you don't want the user to be just driving for like 2 or 3 days or maybe a week, and he's going to be driving, really to have a good score. But if you force the user to drive for a longer period, it is very likely that the user that is there still driving for 30 days is a user that really wants to, get the discount and drive in a normal way. So Undo is also an example of a trial before you buy program that basically uses our technology to measure and to give a score on how the user drives.
Hey, Leonardo, I'm sorry
Yeah,
to interrupt you. We have a
please,
question from the audience.
please.
The question is, are you thinking about developing a real-time assistant that stimulates part of the ADS in order to mitigate risks?
So we are working with a customer request currently. So we, as a company, know we're not developing today. So the way our technology works is after the trip, we analyze that trip and give the insights. But one of the projects that we are considering right now with a European insurer is they want to develop more real-time risks and also including the routes. So it is something that we are exploring, but that's not part of our technology today.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I just want to give also a few words on the family safety side. So family safety engagement or family safety offerings is something that we are starting to see as an interest coming from insurers, because again, they're trying to get engagement in their apps, and they're seeing family safety or the family value proposition is something that would make users to go back to the app more frequently. So in this case, it's just one representation of how a family safety approach would work in an insurer's app. So you, as the head of the family, you go register the family, invite your family members, and at that point, you have an insight of how your family is driving, how many kilometers or miles your family is doing, each member of the family, or even if there is a family that did not want to join, but you still have visibility of how they are driving, of how he or she is driving, and the amount of kilometers or miles that they're making. And you can see how they're doing in terms of how is the family doing, right? In terms of speeding, acceleration, and you can go in each one of these family members and see how they are driving as well. So you also have things like driving trips start and end. So let's assume you have a kid. You want to make sure that you want to know when he's starting to drive and when he arrived at the end of the destination. So it's a very simple notification mechanism, but again, it brings engagement and it brings a reason to go back to the app and check the app every day. So and to finalize, I briefly talked about it, but you can have these family leaderboards, right? So you can have a very good understanding who is driving better, who is driving worse, and you can make some sort of contest that again brings engagement to the app. So these are all possible implementations, user experience that you can leverage by looking at the driving data. So let me see. So the other point that I talked before was about the collisions. I think it's an important topic as well. So if we're talking about collisions, what can the smartphone do for the insurer, right? So essentially, by leveraging the smartphone sensors, we can get very relevant data coming from the accident itself. So not only where the accident happened and the speed that the car was in when the accident happened, but you can get lots of additional data points. So you can get, the G-force, you can get the deceleration that the car had to until to stop. You can get the road type that the user was driving. You can get number of seconds that that the vehicle was stopped. So imagine you had a crash, it stopped for a moment, but then the car stopped working and started driving again. So having those data points actually helps a lot when it comes to investigation. So you know exactly what happened during during the accident itself. We can even get coming from the phone if the airbag was deployed. So we read this from, for example, from the barometer of the phone. So we can also get that kind of insight. What happened inside the car? Yes, you know, the airbags were deployed during that crash. And it's all information that, of course, the user can opt in or can agree to share, but all those informations that the user would never be able to report or would never be able to understand of what happened during the trip. And you can have, for example, a dashboard that for a specific collision, you can see what happened entirely during the trip, where the person started to drive, all the driving events, if it was speeding, braking, you know, cornering, or using the phone, until the point of the crash. And at the moment of the crash, you can have the insights even for the, you know, for the sensor data, for example, for the accelerometer, that helps the investigator to understand, you know, what happened in very high level of details in the moment of the crash itself. So as you may imagine, again, you don't need any hardware in the car. You're essentially, you know, your user or your customer is just using an app provided by the insurer, and from their perspective, it's about a peace of mind. It's about the emotional hook of, if I get involved in an accident, you know, my family will be immediately alerted. I don't need to do anything. They will be alerted, and also proactively, my insurer or my roadside assistance can actually be contacting me, or in case of no contact, and depending on the driving data, on the accident data that we can analyze, customers are even sending ambulances to the scene. So as you may imagine, that improves a lot the customer experience, the automation of the crash moment, and that's one of the key projects that we are working with our insurers today. So we go, yeah. So to finalize, what I have here is just a quick overview of one of the projects we have when it comes to working with our insurance partners and leveraging their risk models and developing a joint scoring based on the smartphone data. This is one of our projects in Latin America with Sura. And so basically, by leveraging, they used to have an OBD or hardware-based program. Long story short, they migrated to the software-based program. And by analyzing, by combining their risk models with our risk models and all the driving data that we captured during the period of time, we were able to, for example, give insights to this customer about, for example, discounts. So, you know, your bad drivers, the ones that are getting, you know, scoring between 1 to 100, something around 40 or 50 or 60, these people are actually representing 44% of your claims costs, whereas, you know, your best drivers are actually contributing with just 4.5% claims of your claims costs. Therefore, they could be in a position to proactively reach out to these great drivers and offer them some sort of incentive or discount because of the way they drive. And of course, work better with their bad users or bad drivers and see if the driving coaching or any other or another element could actually improve their driving behavior over time. So the interesting thing is, of course, this model is available now. They can analyze this data as data is captured, right, from the field, and they can act on that data today. So it's really actionable insights that they're getting from the data, and of course, pricing is one of the angles where insurers are working with us today. To really leverage the power of collecting data coming from the smartphones. So that's what I actually had for today, and happy to talk about any topic that I explained before in more details.
Thank you so much for your presentation, Leonardo. Very detailed and very informative. Thank you so much. As participants are thinking of their questions, and please do, participants, if you'd like to bring up some questions in the group chat. I was wondering, Leonardo, how you effective or differentiative have you felt in right now during this pandemic of being at home? How has life have been working from home, and seeing as how you have this great platform and great tool for optimization, has it affected you in any way?
Yeah, so it's a very interesting point. So in terms of my personal experience, right? So I used to travel a lot because I cover an extensive portion, right, of our go-to-market, and a lot of the interactions, of course, a lot of the interactions were face to face, and lots of great discussions, with innovation hubs and innovation teams and etc. Suddenly, overnight we had to, to make all of these based on Zoom, right? And so definitely, we and I personally felt, right, by starting to have all these now only the interactions only through Zoom, but of course, because there was a very high demand for the technology that we have. And this is coming from different parts of the world, not just here in Europe. Was actually a very important year for us. We actually grew a lot as a company last year. We closed lots of new insurance companies, and again, because the technology was very was demanded, right? So it was demanded for the time. So the technology was very applicable to what the insurers were trying to do, which was to essentially automate user experience, reduce costs, and of course give their end customers the ability to have some sort of usage-based program. So personally speaking, again, the beginning was tough. We used to travel a lot, but I think the customers, they were actually even more available, right, during this time, which helped us a lot as well. So we had great sessions, great interactions, and yes, we closed major deals via Zoom without meeting the customer in person a single time, which for me was a big change. it is usually these interactions and some of these bigger deals, you need a lot of face time with the customer, but during this period, it worked quite well for us.
That's great. Did you see any differences in your in how your customer came about to be able to connect with you, for example, besides them being so available? Any changes in that end customer?
So I guess availability, I think, was one thing. I think customers were, as I mentioned, were more available. Of course, the whole websites and campaigns and materials, right? I think they were a lot of these customers were actually actively looking for solutions and going to our websites and going to checking our marketing campaigns and etc. So we definitely saw that as a big change as well. So customers were looking for us more proactively in the digital channels, and that is definitely something that we noticed. But if you ask me, the biggest change, I think, for me is really the quality time that we had with these customers last year. Because they were so available, and that helped a lot in these discussions. I would point out as one of the biggest changes that I saw.
Thank you. How about the obstacles that you encountered during this time?
You mean specifically for the COVID, right?
Yes.
For working from home. Yeah, I guess as we're talking about driving data and driving behavior in the usage-based programs. I think in the beginning, for the customers to get used to the technology, they had to go drive. that's one of the key, limitations we had during many months last year. And so from one perspective, some customers had a few groups that were still driving and could test drive the technology. But also what played in our favor is because we had so many other references and we had so many other driving data and experience that helped us a lot as well in terms of trusting our technology for a first-time customer. But for sure, living and feeling the app, feeling the product to work, there was a limitation for some time because they couldn't go for the drive.
Well, can you speak more about those limitations?
You mean, well, it's essentially around, if the app is, as I mentioned, it's a software-based solution, right? So, and it's all about capturing the driving data and the driving behavior. So if these users were not driving enough, they could not see, the driving data coming and the driving data building and really experiencing the app and our technology. And that was one key limitation we had for a couple of months, because people were just not driving, and if they're not driving, they're not experiencing the app, they're not seeing the technology in action, and they couldn't say, okay, that data makes sense, and therefore, I'm comfortable with this solution. But as I mentioned, even with all these limitations, we as a company had a very successful year last year. And again, all driven by the fact that insurers needed to act in the fact that they needed to offer some sort of usage-based insurance program.
That's great. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Leonardo, for your presentation and being able to answer all of our so many questions from ourselves and the audience members. I thank you so much. I appreciate you joining our program, and really thank you for being able to take part in our program and be able to speak to our participants.
Yeah, thank you very much. I hope the information that I shared today was useful for the participants. And again, thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, participants, we have just heard from Mr. Leonardo, and up next we have a break.